Hey guys, been looking forward to this week for a while now. My Asphodel Meadows album comes out again, but this time released properly, so it'll be available on all services, like everything that you want to listen to it on. When I released the album last year, I didn't make any videos about it at the time. I made one video in 2015, but last year when I released it, I wanted to make a making of or talk about the history of the album, but I was too stressed, too depressed, and there was a lot going on, so I just didn't end up getting it done and didn't really know what to say or whatever. So it didn't happen, but now I'm much more prepared and ready to talk about it with you guys. So, first of all, we're going to talk about the history of it, going back to the beginning and having a look at why I came up with it and whatever. So I came up with it essentially out of boredom because it was a fantasy. I didn't really think at the time that I would get to record music, or I didn't really know how I would if I could. It was 2009 and I was working double full-time hours for my mum in her newly acquired cafe, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. I didn't really like being there. All I wanted to do was be a full-time musician, so I had to come up with a few ideas of how I could do that. I'd started one project called Fetid Newborn Cuntopsy, which was a slam death metal project, and I wrote 5 songs for that project, like a demo on a program called Guitar Pro. That was all I had at the time to record down ideas, and it allowed you to sort of export them in like a MP3 or a WAV file or whatever, and you could hear the songs back, but it was really shit sounding. But I really enjoyed writing that way, and I did a few songs that way, and yeah, it felt good. I was making something, and that always feels good. So I spent most of my nights after leaving work either working on these ideas or researching new music, and then I would think about and work on a lot of my ideas while I was at work. So I had a lot of free time at work. Right as I graduated in November 2008, my mum bought a cafe, and it was my job to run the kitchen. I'd never cooked anything in my life, nothing that at least it didn't come out of a packet, and this was my job. I was effectively conscripted into hospitality, and I would learn the hard way. This taught me a great deal about hard work, but it also came with a lot of downtime in the afternoons, and this was when I did a lot of thinking and writing. So even though I was working, or I was there 80 hours a week, getting less than $5 an hour, I would spend a lot of these afternoons having to just wait around, either for something to make or waiting for customers, or occasionally I would have to watch the shop if my mum had to go out, or we didn't have staff on or whatever, or if it got busy I would do stuff. But yeah, I was there a lot, and I came up with Asphodel Meadows during these downtimes. So why Asphodel Meadows? As I said, I had already made a death metal project, Fetid Newborn Cuntopsy, and I was really also into doom metal and black metal, so I couldn't not make another project. I also wanted something with a bit more richness and a bit more story to it. At the time, my favourite band was Nile. Carl Sanders is hands down the most influential musician on me, period. His songs have really thought-provoking stories attached to them, and he was able to take his interest in Egyptian and Middle Eastern mythologies and historical texts and turn them into these incredibly epic songs. This was a revelation to me at the time, and it really changed my life and how I viewed art entirely. All of his albums, which I have all of them, in particular, at the time, this one, Annihilation of the Wicked, was my favourite, and it comes with like all these linear notes. I would read these linear notes with even more enthusiasm than I did the lyrics. He took music to another level, and I wanted to follow in his footsteps, essentially. He inspired me to study more about ancient history and myths, and I was really drawn to Greek mythology. As a kid growing up, I'd always watched Disney's Hercules, and there was also a live action Hercules which I really liked, but it sort of introduced me to the Greek ancient mythology, and so I read more about their culture and their mythical places, and their culture is quite rich in this sense, I think. There are heaps and heaps of great stories that could be told, and I hope to tell. Eventually, of course, I came across the Asphodel Meadows, which are a place in the underworld where ordinary souls go. People who don't really do anything bad as such, that they don't need to go to Tartarus, which is their hell, but they didn't really do anything great either, or anything heroic, so they didn't get to go to the Elysium Fields. So it was where everyone else went. Fields covered in asphodel flowers. That's what it was. So I obviously took this as a name and thought about what kind of a story I could come up with. It took me ages, actually, to come up with the concept that I've got now, but yeah, I thought about it a lot, and eventually it just sort of pieced itself together, and even recently I'm still developing the idea, and I've got a very good idea of what I want it to be now, but yeah. So at the same time that this was all happening, still in 2009, I had my first bout of major depression and sort of felt suicidal for the first time. I fell for this girl that I couldn't have, and I was in a terrible place. I was starting to think about suicide, and luckily I didn't kill myself. I pulled through it. I listened to a lot of metal. Metal got me through a lot of it. Positive bands like Gojira and Lamb of God and Meshuggah and things like that got me through it too. But I was not like this guy. Not at all. She left in 2010, and after that I felt a lot better. I was wondering what I was so sad about. Silly emotions. But unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last time. I again had a lot of depression later that year when business was going really badly, and we ended up having to sell a shop, but it was a bit different. I was able to focus more, and that was also when I started finding a lot of depressive, suicidal black metal bands, and that was when I sort of developed the idea of making tracks that were about the pain in my life and depression and isolation and suicide. That could be a good way to progress this story. So I killed myself, and then I'm in the underworld, and I can go on an adventure in the underworld. It was going to be 3 tracks called Aksenov 1, 2 and 3, but eventually that has now become 3 albums at least. I, as I said, didn't have any way to record music, so I just wrote down some notes, and I drew myself a little map of the underworld so I could sort of envision the journey. And I think doing this helped me sort of cement the idea that I was going to do it, and it wouldn't matter how much time passed, I was going to come back to it somehow. And that's what happened. Without intentionally doing it, I basically went on hiatus for 5 years. By then, 2015, I'd gotten Ableton and some other gear, my analog synthesizer, and I was regularly making electronic music. The only problem was that I was still getting a lot of bouts of depression, or was constantly underlyingly depressed. Techno was not really a very good way of releasing those emotions, even though it would make me feel good making electronic music. It wasn't really getting that voice out. So, as I said, I've got this analog synthesizer, the Gaia, and that year, while I was feeling really shit, I kept thinking that I should go back to this Asphodel Meadows idea and make some depressive suicidal black metal. That might be a good way to get how I was feeling out. So I ended up that winter making the guitar tracks for Isolation, and that was more influenced by like Abyssicate and Burzum and things like that. And then A Vision for Paradise, I wanted to be a little bit more of a resolution or a solution kind of track. It was meant to feel good, and it does feel good when I listen to it. But it was more inspired by like doom metal bands like Electric Wizard and just sort of slow, stonery kind of vibes. And I left that alone for another couple months, and then again I found myself having a crush on another girl, and this time, not for the first time since then, but again, I took it too seriously, too quickly, too personally, and I obviously saw some sort of a pattern in that and didn't think that there'd be any way out of it, and I thought about killing myself. But again, instead of doing that, this girl that I liked was a really good artist when it came to drawing, and I got the idea to do some drawing. I did a lot of drawing when I was a kid, so I was just competent enough to sort of get ideas out. I really struggled when I was a kid because I didn't have much of a strong third eye to be able to see the things on the page, but smoking a lot of weed helps with that. So I ended up drawing this picture. I call it The Weight of Nobody, and after I'd finished it, I shared it on my daily vlog, and the negative emotions sort of subsided. I felt really good that I'd made something. There was still a lot more to get out though, so I spent the next week turning to music instead, and I started putting the album together. Made a dark ambient track for the video about the drawing, and that became Dark Energy. Then I found the lyrics for I See Them, I Serve Them, part of them, and then I started recording that song, and I've got that other video I made that's all about that and how I made that, so I don't really need to talk about that. But I left the project again after that for a while to work on my first album as Aksenov, called Fat One, which I've got here. Still got a few copies of these, but that's a techno album, and I released that at the end of that year, and I was also dealing with the grind of having a daily vlog, so I didn't really have much time to keep working on Asphodel Meadows, and I wasn't really emotionally in the right place. I was sort of starting to feel good, and I wanted to come back to it when I was ready, essentially. I really wanted to work on it in 2016, but towards the start of 2016, I became head chef at the place that I was working, and I was way too busy and stressed to do anything, so as soon as I'd come home, I didn't want to do anything. I'd just drink and get high. And then I'd moved into my grandma's place, and then, there was a lot of shit went down that year, and it was a very dark year for me. So coming into 2017, I'd just gotten someone to replace me as head chef, and I went on a break, moved back into my grandma's place after moving out, and then I had a lot of free time, so I then was able to come and finish the album, and I was definitely emotionally ready. I was definitely in the right place to keep going then. All I had to do at that time was finish up the drum tracks, which are very simple, but I spent a fair bit of time trying to get it right. They're all sampled, but I can play drums, but I don't have a very good way of recording drums. I want my drum tracks to sound really good, so they're all samples, and then I would just compose them in the way that I would have played it. So I pay a lot of attention to like little tiny fills here and there, and just little like dynamic changes in things, and made sure I got the sub bass right. Spent a lot of time mastering and trying to EQ it so it all sounded good, and the vocals and all of that. And then I just had to make Farewell, and I made Farewell and the album artwork in the same day. The 3 beer bottles that you can see that are in the album artwork are the 3 beers that I drank in Farewell. As you can hear, obviously in the later half of Farewell, I'm just a lot of drinking. I drank those beers. And then I ran out of beer, and I ended up having to refill them with water so I could keep drinking, because I wanted it to sound like I was drinking a lot. And then the artwork, took the bottles and I took all the medication I could find in my house, and then went in the kitchen, and we had an evaporative air conditioning vent, and I've got one of these gorilla pods, which I've currently got a field recorder on, and I wrapped it around it so I could hang it off the ceiling. I think it's pretty good representation. It's like, from being above, looking at me below is kind of symbolic of me being in a lower place and then dying, and then I guess the spirit goes under the underworld in that sense. So it's not like rising, but it's important that I'm sort of looking down, I'm being looked down upon. Any time I've ever had an out-of-body experience, which has happened 3 times, I've always gone up and looked at myself downwards. So now, in hindsight, I'd kind of wish that I'd gotten some fake blood or something for it, but at the time I guess I didn't either think about it or couldn't have been bothered. So that week I finished the album and released it, and I wasn't able to at the time upload it on everything like I did with this album, which I've since had to take down so that I can re-upload it on my label, but I want to remake it anyway. So I just uploaded it to SoundCloud and Bandcamp, and it's still on there. And then a few days later, I was searching for Asphodel Meadows on YouTube for some reason, and then I noticed that someone had ripped the album and put it up on their channel, the depressive black metal channel, and it got quite a few views, so I didn't really bother putting it up on YouTube for that reason, because I thought, I'm just kind of happy that a lot of people are seeing it. But I recently made him delete it, and it got up to 713 views, which I think's pretty good. Still need more people to hear it though. Made him delete it. I can't have someone else benefiting from my work, so that's why I haven't put it on my channel yet, but I will this weekend. So it was going to be too expensive for me to have, as another artist, not Aksenov, but Asphodel Meadows, to do the same thing that I did with Aksenov, go through Reverb Nation and join up as an artist. It cost $200 a year, and I couldn't afford it, so I didn't. But then eventually I found out the benefits of having a record label. I spent the next year working on Only Natural Records and a whole bunch of other projects, so I've finally made it to the point now where I can release anything I want for free and have it on every service available. So going forward, it's not going to be another 5 years before I I'm not going on another hiatus. I'm going to start working on it, but I've also got a lot of other projects to work on, so I can't promise you exactly when it'll be ready, but I will be more productive going forward. And currently I've got 12 albums that I'm working on for various aliases. You can check them out on my website, onlynaturalrecords.com. There's some artist names and album artwork and some brief descriptions to get you guys excited. So that's the history of this album. I hope it was interesting. I'm grateful to be able to share it with you guys. I'm glad that I'm still alive, to be able to continue working on my legacy of becoming like Carl Sanders. And actually better. I'm going to be better. I hope sharing my story sort of gives you a bit of inspiration, because not as if I had it all given to me. I just made it happen. So hopefully you guys will either start writing some music, or if you are writing music, maybe work a bit harder to get it out or whatever. So anyway, I've said enough. I'll see you guys next time I upload on one of my channels. But until then, be sure to follow all of my other projects. I'll leave all the links in the description. Subscribe to this channel, listen to the album. If you really like it, I would really appreciate it if you bought it. It's only a few dollars, and it would really help me and motivate me to make the next album. With all that being said, thank you guys, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.